Noob School. All right, well, welcome back to Noob School. Another great episode ahead. I've got an old friend, a colleague that I've worked with going back to 98, 99, 2000, we can't quite remember, but Javier Buzzalino. And Javi is different than most people that we've had on the show because his specialty is on the development side. You know, building products, making them work, understanding what the customer needs. And that's kind of his official title. I think unofficially I've seen him as a secret salesperson. Y'all have heard of the Secret Santa? He's like the secret salesperson because if you take him to a presentation, you know, they don't suspect that the smart guy over here is actually going to be selling anything, but he's quite a good salesperson too. So thanks for being on the show today.
Pleasure.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So back it up. Let's just do kind of the whole career, and we'll focus on areas where you had to use some of your sales skills to get a job, a promotion, talk someone into something, whatever you had to do. So we're going to go back to, I believe, Buenos Aires.
That's where I was born, in Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires. And how long were you there?
I was born in Buenos Aires, and I was middle-class family. Mm-hmm. Dad was an engineer. Mom was an English professor, English teacher. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up there and always gravitated towards science, engineering, and so started school engineering. Dad passed away when I was very young. I was 14 years old. That changed completely the dynamics of the family because, I was exposed to growing up, a little earlier than perhaps others.
Right.
And so went to school of engineering, all that, and I had to get a job. I didn't, we didn't have a lot of money at that time. And so out of one of those things, I applied with a company called IBM.
Little old company.
And this company had internships and things like that. And so I said, well, what the hell? It has nothing to do with engineering, but, let's give it a try.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, what IBM was doing is there was no computer science programs in Argentina at that time. And they were looking for people who could learn computer science or software. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, the second best is the people who understand a lot of mathematics. And there were two disciplines in engineering that were very, very good. One was aeronautical engineering, and the other one was hydraulics. Mm-hmm. They both have a lot of mathematics. And they said, well, we're going to get people from these schools. And in the University of Buenos Aires, where I did my master's, in hydraulics, we were 6. And 4 went to IBM, so it was basically the whole class.
Right.
And so I started getting into software, and in one thing turned to the other one, I started liking it, and I started realizing that this was really good.
So right after university, you went to work for IBM.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
And IBM did one thing that it was pretty peculiar. When they converted me to full-time employee, they said, well, we understand you understand technology. We get it. You seem to be good at it. But we want you to be a salesman.
I didn't know this part of the story.
And so I said, okay. And they said, well, I'm not sure my personality type is for sales. And they said, well, let's put it this way. He says, the money you make today will make it your fixed salary. And we'll double that with the commissions. So even though if you sell 0 and you're a complete disaster, you make exactly the same money. And I was like, well, okay, whatever. Let's give it a try. Let's see what happens.
A free bet. I like that. Okay.
So 1 year of sales training course, 1 year of a complete systems engineering from IBM.
Yeah.
So now I had, in civil engineering, master's in engineering. Now I did systems engineering in IBM for another year. And I started getting involved into more software and not only projects, but basically on selling. And two things came out of that. First of all, they said that I was pretty good at it. And the second one is I did not like it. So I was like, okay. And at that time, Argentina had hyperinflation. The country was extremely unstable.
Yeah.
So I said, hey, perhaps I need to try to do something different, and perhaps I need to live somewhere else.
So, how old would you have been then? Like
I was in the mid-20s.
mid-20s? And so you wanted to get out of Argentina, and you went to the States?
I went to Canada.
Canada, okay.
So, and that's a different story. If you want a point of selling, this was an interesting story. There was I have a brother and a sister. They're older. They both emigrated to Canada. And so by the time I was at this point in my life, they were already living in Canada. So I went to the Canadian embassy and I said, hey, I want to emigrate to Canada. They have a scoring system. So you basically, based on your background, what you do, to give you points. And the points were fine. I was fine. And they said, I had a meeting with the consul. And the consul says, well, you're crazy. He says, you have a brother and a sister that are Canadian. They can let you come to Canada by being family. They sponsor you. And they basically, give financial insurance that you're not going to be a burden to the Canadian government, and you're fine. You admit it.
Yeah.
It's just paperwork.
Yeah.
So I looked at the consul and said, listen, I have a job in IBM. I'm an account manager. I'm doing financially very well. If I cannot do it on my own, why do I want to go to Canada? The guy looks at me and says, you understand that all the people come here and beg me to be admitted, and you're challenging me. He says, this is not, it's unheard.
Yeah.
And the guy said, well, I challenge you. Back.
Yeah.
60 days. If you quit your job today, and in 60 days, you put your feet with your family in Canada, you're Canadian. And so I believe that moment was perhaps one of those sales trainings that where you actually know where you stand, you know that you cannot be run over, and you stand your feet and you explain what it is that you want and where you are. And I walked to that meeting with a challenge that is, what do I do now?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you probably don't read a bunch of sales books, but there was a real popular one a couple of years ago called The Challenger Sale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you were doing that before the book came out.
That's exactly
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, Challenger Sale is interesting because obviously it teaches you to know so much about what you're selling that you can legitimately challenge and push back on the prospect. And I'm sure you do a lot of that. So that's interesting you were doing it before they were. So you moved to Canada.
Moved to Canada, landed in Canada. Then I realized that it was the middle of a recession.
Yeah.
Unemployment was 12%, and I was like, oh, okay, what do I do for a living?
Yeah.
And there was this company called Fluor, and Fluor is an engineering, procurement, construction company, and they had a mess with software, and I had a very interesting profile because I had studied civil engineering, and at the same time, I actually had a software background,
Right.
and that was pretty rare.
Yeah.
And so I said, hey, I'll get a job as a entry-level programmer and see where it leads. And I said, either I don't like this or I like this, and we'll see what happens. And but to make a long story short, 5 years later, I had a team of 50 people reporting to me, and I was building software. And then one point they told me from headquarters that was either Irvine or Greenville. They told me, hey, guy, you need to move to corporate. And so I couldn't afford California. I didn't have enough money to even buy or rent an apartment or anything. So I was like, okay, I'm moving to Greenville.
Yeah. That's interesting. So one of the things you had going for you, and from my perspective, is you had like a talent stack already by the time you were 25. And what I mean is, because of your family situation, you had to take some leadership, pretty early on in your life. So that gave you actually an advantage to have become a leader earlier. Obviously, you're multilingual, at least 2 languages that I know of, and then got an excellent education, a technical education, and then got that cross-training in sales.
Yeah.
And so you put all those 4 together and you compare this person versus someone who just got a technical education or just a salesperson. It's not a fair fight. And that's exactly what we're looking for. Right? We're looking for
That's
not
exactly.
a fair fight. So,
What was fascinating is, let me do a callback into, I was an intern in IBM, just basically out of school kind of
Yeah.
thing. And this is the first time Argentina has a national government election. It was a military regime. There
Yeah.
hadn't been elections for 15 years.
Yeah.
The government, Argentina decides we're going to do elections again. The big problem the country has is they want to make the elections transparent to inspire confidence.
Yeah.
They have no idea how to let the process of the election be communicated to the country in a fair way. So they pick IBM and they pick 3 or 4 companies and they say, IBM, can you help us show the results as they go on of the election day? And to make the public, feel at ease that this is basically for real.
yeah.
And IBM had no idea what to do. And they started talking to themselves and they said, we don't want any IBM employee talking about this because of the political ramifications of this. We're scared.
Yeah.
Interns. Okay. So, and I was with a personal computing group and they said, Javier, you think you can actually write a program in a personal computer that displays in national television the results of the election as they go on? And I was like, I need a couple of people. He says, well, how many do you need? I don't know, 5? None.
Yeah.
And spent 2 months of my life without sleeping, writing code.
Yeah.
And we did programs to basically show the election in real time.
Wow.
The thing started snowballing and they gave me more people. Now, IBM people started coming to the group.
Yeah.
60 days later, I was managing 55 people. And I started realizing something is with my personality that I somehow get to these things, these hurricanes, and I'm always basically managing these groups of people. And something must be in my personality somewhere. And highly successful. I got a commendation from the minister of the country and all that. And they make me a tour to the president and all the things. And it worked great.
Yeah.
And this pattern repeated.
Yeah.
I believe that the sales education that I had is something that stayed with me. You're always selling.
Yeah.
When you're home with your wife, when you are with your children,
Yeah.
when you are in the restaurant,
Yeah.
there's always points in your life that you're constantly is listening,
Yeah.
is understanding, and is presenting your case,
Right. Persuading.
persuading.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because, to me, it's funny, but, we worked together for a number of years and we would go on these calls together. We would laugh. We would always laugh with you about how good you were as a secret weapon. But I never knew, you never told me that you'd actually sold before. And now it all makes sense. But it's a good lesson, and we're not even to your 30s yet, but it's a good lesson for people to really think about building their personal talent stack. It's easy to say, I want to lead a big company. I want to build a 1,000-person company. It's easy to say that and maybe to want to do it. But then you have to step back and say, what does that perfect person look like that would do that? That person would understand sales, marketing, something about development, customer service, accounting, raising money. There would be a number of things that person would have to kind of, in a perfect world, know about. And if they didn't know about one piece of it, they need to fill that hole somehow. But I see more people say, I want to start a business and then not have the faintest idea how to do it. So anyway, you're off to a good start. So you're in Canada now, and you're working for Fluor. Fluor Daniel used to be
Fluor Daniel.
Sorry, Fluor Daniel used to be the Greenville.
Charles Daniel.
Greenville company, and they moved you to Greenville. And so, what were you working on then?
Let me tell you a story about
Yeah.
this. I was in Canada and I started getting a bigger team, and in the group of central, engineering told me, says, we have a big problem. They had, a big old program that did materials, and it was so old that they couldn't even utilize laser printers that started appearing, and they were much more effective than the old, basically clunky dot matrices.
Dot matrix, yeah.
And so they says, well, can you do something about fixing this? We got a quote. The quote is like $600,000 to change the program to support laser printing. And I sat down, started thinking of the problem, and make a long story short, 3 weeks later, I had a program that did the thing. And that became very popular. And so they started saying, okay, we're going to give this guy some more challenges. That was good. They brought me to Greenville, and they told me, you think you can solve a problem of material planning for engineering projects? And I said, okay. And they says, we have a person that can help you. He says, I'm going to do it alone. He says, no, we'll give you a person to help you. That was Andrew Kurtz.
Was what?
Andrew Kurtz.
Andrew Kurtz. Wow, Andy, okay.
So Andy
Yeah.
was were together, and we decided to actually see if we can write a material requirements planning.
Okay.
Andy is phenomenally smart, as you probably know.
Yeah.
And Andy is an accounting guy. So we sat down and we started thinking about it, and we basically did a phenomenal program. And at the end of that, they told me that to move to Greenville. And Fluor had a lot of disparate material systems, like 10. And it was obvious to me that the problem of communicating the systems with each other was not working. And so I said, you need to throw all this to the garbage and rewrite it. And they were like, well, how much does it cost to do that? And he's like, well, it's $2 million. He says, well, our software projects are 10,000, 20,000. He says, $2 million is unheard of. And then I used the IBM sales training. And I said, okay. He says, so you're saying that we cannot afford it. IT can afford it. No, we can't. Who can? He says, well, some people in Fluor have the power to do that. I'm saying, who?
Yeah.
And they said, well, it's the project executives, project directors of big projects, the engineering refinery projects. And then I started thinking, saying, what does this guy decide, an engineering project manager? And they told me, oh, these guys make big decisions. When you buy a reactor for a refinery, they make a decision of which supplier will actually get awarded for a $20 million contract. And they do that. Yeah. And they make those decisions. They do. So I presented the software project as a bid evaluation of an equipment purchase. I formatted it exactly like that. They loved it, and they approved it.
And how much would that cost?
$2 million.
It was $2 million, yeah.
And we wrote Material Manager,
Yeah.
that, by the way, I met a week ago. And the Fluor is now 30 years later. The same program is still running.
Wow.
15,000 engineering projects were executed with that software.
Wow.
15,000.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, guys, I'm not sure we need to be in the software business. What do we do now? And so I sat down with the Fluor people, that the executives running this project are my intern, my junior software developer, and the secretary of the group 30 years ago.
Yeah.
They did their careers, they progressed phenomenally. Yeah. And so I get to speak with them again, and we're intersecting our careers again.
So does that meeting happen, or is it going to happen?
It's already happened.
Already happened. It was good. You had a good
We're going
time?
to have, excellent.
Yeah.
And we're going to have sessions next week in campus and all that.
Yeah. I think, a lesson there that I want to, just call out is, back to the challenger thing, is that you, in your professional opinion, after looking at it, you're willing to tell them something that was uncomfortable, which is all this stuff you're talking about, bring it all together, it needs to all go away, and we need to start over. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to take a while. And that's the answer. Because you could do all the messing around you want with these 15 packages, but it's never going to work like you want it.
It's never going to work.
And they didn't want to hear it.
No.
But something about the way you told them, they probably believed you, that it was real. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so you did that big project. Now, Andy was working at Fluor at that time?
Andy was working at Fluor.
Okay.
We did Material Manager. He was my architect, or we worked together.
Yeah.
Half the way through the project, he told me, Javi, I love you, but I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to create my own company.
He's great. He's great. He's got a great company right now, doing custom projects and stuff.
I know.
Do you work with him at all?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think he has been staff augmentation for every job I did for the last 25 years.
Okay.
This relationship you build and last forever.
Right. Yeah. Once you establish trust,
That's exactly what it is.
you could just call up and it's taken care of. Wonderful. Okay, so keep going from there. How far between there and when you and I
So
met?
Fluor basically put me aside and they told me, hey, Javi, great success, material manager. We like your styling software. We need you to go to the next level. And they said, okay, we want you to be the CIO of Fluor.
Oh, Fluor.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I said, okay. And he says, well, what does a CIO do? Can somebody explain what he does do for a living?
Yeah, I'll do it.
And
What is it?
so they told me, he says, well, we're buying SAP. We need to implement SAP.
Mm-hmm.
We have a very tight budget at the time. I think it was 60 million. We need a person that leads this. He says, are we going to be writing code? No. You need to deal with SAP.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking for a job.
You didn't want to do that. Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a great job for somebody,
Yeah.
but not for necessarily for my style.
Yeah, I mean, somebody who loves being a project manager on a big project for 2 years. I mean, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it for 10 days.
I'm not sure I will be. I'm not sure I'll be good at it.
Yeah.
And it's a skill that is different.
Right.
And so.
Well, that's a good point, Javi, because you said something a little while ago that when you ended up kind of accidentally managing that team to do the election results software, that you were all of a sudden managing 50 people, and you're like, hey, I'm pretty good at this. The faster you can discover the things that that come easy to you, and then also figure out the stuff that's very difficult for you. And the thing I tell people is the mistake people make is they find something that's hard for them, and then they like really try to overcome it. They try to say, well, I'm going to learn how to be an accountant, darn it. And if it's not there, it's not there.
It's not there. It's not there.
Yeah, but if you can find something that you are good at, I'd spend
You
your time
like
on
it,
that.
and if something that you're good at, you never work a day in your life.
Right. It's fun.
It's fun.
It's fun. All right, so that means that you started looking for a job, and
Mr. Greg Jackson.
yeah. So
Greg
it was
used to work
was that
in-
Harbinger? Was that?
Greg was he was in Canada in a company called TRS that is a Fluor recruiting agency.
Okay.
They hire talent.
Okay.
He knew me from TRS.
Okay.
Because, I started in Fluor, temporary and then became an employee
Yeah.
and all that. And then he followed, when he moved to Greenville, we followed and we kept our careers, and we had a common friend called Peter Grace so we kept talking. We were Canadians in Greenville, so we were like talking to each other. And Greg told me, he says, I have a person I want you to meet. It's Dr. Blackwell from a company called DataStream. You need to meet this guy. And so I said, okay. And I was saying, listen, I'm not sure I want to work in a company where software is not important. I would like to work in a company where software is important.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's big, small, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I took me to a meeting to talk with Larry. And so I remember he told me, he says, well, 30 minutes meeting, spend an hour and a half talking with Larry. Larry was a fascinating person because the guy was uber smart and he could sense, I think he had a sponge effect that whenever something that he didn't know, he wanted to learn more. Learn more, give me more, give me more. So he kept asking questions after question after question.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I just left that meeting and I said, this is not good. This was a 30-minute meeting. It lasted an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And, this guy wanted to hear a lot, this is it. He says, I need to sing what I'm going to do for a living. And half an hour later, Greg Jackson called me and says, what did you tell Larry? I was like, why? He says, they want you here now. I have no idea what you're talking, but
Wow.
they told me, says, we need to get this guy. Tell me what you want.
Yeah.
So I went to join Procure.
Yeah. Yeah. And was Alex in charge of that then?
No, it was Greg already.
It was Greg already.
Greg was being switching. Alex was being moving out to more financial functions, and Greg was doing the iProcure. So we were doing, if you think about it, we were doing in DataStream a web product, multi-tenant in the cloud.
Yeah.
In the year 1999, 2000.
I know. It's
And
crazy.
that is basically 23 years before we're doing it today.
I know. We were early. We were early to that party. There's a lot we could revisit that. A lot of different paths we could take, but the people who survived and really profited in that kind of iProcure.com world, they managed to hang in there, right? They kind of kept it together long enough where, the technology improved and adoption rates improved. We were fighting adoption rates so hard.
Oh my gosh.
Getting people to switch how they bought gloves. They were like, well, what do I do? Poke there, And, it was, but yeah, but we couldn't have had better people than you and Greg to help get that thing started.
Did I tell you the story about Lumina and Lear?
Did I tell you the story?
Did I tell you?
Well, I've got some Lumina stories too, but you go ahead, you tell me your story.
I'll tell you a story, another sales story.
Yeah. This Lumina was head of purchasing.
He was a head of purchasing
Lear.
in an automotive supplier,
Yeah.
and called Lear. And they had adopted iProcure. And we were actually in the early stages, and they were trying to adopt, and traditional struggles that you have when you have software that is early and pioneering, but we were doing well.
Yeah.
One day they call me and they do a big rant, typical of automotive, where they tell me, Javi, in this screen, there's a process that takes a couple of seconds, and the cursor does not turn into an hourglass. And I was like, I've been, not sleeping for last week trying to make this work, with a team of people.
Yeah.
And this guy is basically furious but I said, I need to listen to the customer. So I just kept calm and listened to him. I said, okay, so you want an hourglass here? Yeah, okay. So on a weekend, I rallied all the people to data stream, and we started thinking how to put an hourglass, and somebody came with an idea, brilliant, and they put it, and it worked. I was so upset, so mad, that I went to the mall, to the Haywood Mall, and walked around. And to just relax, I said, if I go home, I'm going to be so bitter that this is not good. And I came across the Bombay company, or one of those store companies, and I said, I'm going to look what they have. And they had a big hourglass. One of those decorational things that you put in your living room.
Yeah.
And bought the hourglass and shipped it FedEx to Lumina that night. And I told them, it says, we implemented the hourglass in iProcure, and I think this belongs in your dining room.
Yeah, that's funny.
And the guy still calls me and remembers, says, oh, you're the guy who sent me the hourglass.
Yeah.
And sometimes those little touches. And the relationship after that changed completely.
Yeah.
The guy was now no longer, he was more friendly, more, the barriers were down.
Right.
It was more collaborational.
Right.
So it's amazing, just small little symbols, small little things.
It's good. It's a good sales lesson. You found a way to break through the normal vendor-seller relationship. And that's where you want to be, because I don't really believe in the vendor-seller relationship, because I feel like we're both kind of vendors, right? I'm giving you something, you're giving me something. It's kind of a barter system. And I think particularly in automotive, they kind of just sit here like this and try to beat you up. But yeah, that was wild. So we had Javi and I and our team started a .com within our company, and it was wild for a couple of years, because it was the wildest time, because things were changing so fast and valuations were so high. It was crazy.
Contradicting accounting, that is part of your comments in your book, that is very astute.
Right.
And the .coms were valued more the more they lost.
Right.
That was kind of crazy. It was like the more you lose, and the thought process was that at that time was, we think this is a big opportunity. The more you lose, the more investment you're doing, and the more you're going to be valued eventually.
Right.
Without having the way of discerning when are you losing money because you're not good, versus when you're losing money when you're investing astutely.
I know. We had one company, I don't remember which one it was, but one, they would come try to buy us every now and then. And one company showed up, and I had the audacity to ask them about their business model. I'm like, I don't understand how you guys would ever make money when you're doing this and you're giving away this. And the guy goes, well, he goes, I wouldn't worry about it. Wall Street thinks we're worth $3 billion. And like, 6 months later they were worth zero?
$1.
Yeah. So, it was a wild time. It was a wild time.
Remember the Enron story? I'm going to give you another sales story.
Yeah.
I procured the e-commerce solution to Enron Oil, and the smartest guy in the room, that was the slogan.
The best company in the history of the world.
Yeah. So you actually asked him, you said, hey, why don't we bring one of the executives to Greenville so we learn?
Yeah.
And so we put like 40 people from development, product management, sales. Everybody was in a room to hear to the smartest guy in the room. That was the slogan of Enron.
Yeah.
And we heard to the guy. I had no idea what the guy talked for an hour. I couldn't understand one sentence.
Yeah.
This didn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. The next morning, Enron were bankrupt, and the guy went to Larry asking for a job. All in 24 hours.
Yeah. We had we had so many Enron stories. But Enron, before they went under, they were they managed pipelines and refineries. They had a real strong business, and they used our software to maintain all that stuff. And then when they got into all the financial stuff they were doing, we sold them iProcure stuff. And so I went out there I thought I was just going to sign the contract, and it was a multi-million-dollar contract. And I got out there, and they're like, whoa, we got some work left to do in the contract. So it took like a week of we'd show up, we'd make some changes, whatever. So finally he says, okay, we're done. I just got to go get it signed now. And I'm like, you can't sign it? And he was like, no, I got to get someone else to sign it. So we go in this guy's office, this young guy, and he looks at the thing and he goes, so you're gonna pay these guys a couple $1 million for some .com software that's just going to be on the shelf to maybe sell later? And my guy goes, yeah. And he goes, Mr. Sterling, could you step out for a minute? I need to talk to this guy. So I stepped out, and then my guy comes walking out, and his head's down. He's like, oh, he's just so mad, And I'm like, what happened? He goes, he's not going to sign it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So what are we going to do? And he goes, don't worry about it. There's plenty of people who can sign. So we started going person to person until finally, the fourth guy's like, sure, I'll sign. Just signed it. So they were running a little loose there at the end, for sure.
It's an amazing story.
Yeah. So we got through you coming on board with us, and then it wasn't that many years later. You ended up running all development for our company, and then it wasn't that many years later that we sold the company to Infor. Mm-hmm. And they kicked all the yahoos like me out, but they kept you.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was, all the executives were in DataStream, and they put me aside and they told me, says, hey, we're going to separate the other executives. We think that, it's good to cut it off at this time. It's nothing personal. We think the people running the show are really, really smart people. He says, but you're in such a technical role that we'll leave it up to you. Mm-hmm. Do you want to stay or do you want to move? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'll stay. I'm happy with what I'm doing. And so I stayed. And then the next morning they called me and says, well, there's a condition. And I said, what's the condition? He says, well, you have all product development, that is, 100 and something people. You just inherit another 300 people. That is another 3 teams of other yahoos that are doing something else. Yeah. And I was like, okay. So it was the first time that now I'm starting to manage hundreds.
Right.
And that is a big change in the way you manage technical things. And I started realizing at that time that for me is layers. And I think the Army has found this out. Mm-hmm. I found it probably 100 years later. Mm-hmm. That one thing is teams of 10, you're like brothers. Mm-hmm. One thing is teams of 50 or 60, you know everywhere by their first name, you know their families. Mm-hmm. When you get to 200, you just cannot. Mm-hmm. You don't know them anymore.
Just moving stuff around the board.
It's like you no longer can develop a relationship with 200 people,
right.
300 people, personal, one-on-one. You don't have time.
Right.
And And when you get to, 300, 400, if you meet with every person once a day, you see them once a year.
Right. Right.
And so
So-
you just have to start now delegating, making others do things, and you have to start working through others. That is very different.
So right now, in the last count, you had, 1,000 people or 2,000?
1,600.
1,600. So Javi has 1,600 people working for him that are developing or product managing, I suppose, the various products at the company. How many managers do you have to manage that many people? What's the ratio?
I like many. The answer is many.
Yeah.
But I believe that the sweet spot for people to manage other groups is 6 to 8. And so you cannot have more of 8 people that you interact on a regular basis reporting to you. You just lose control.
Yeah.
I think that there's Accenture that did studies that if you try to keep 14 ideas in your brain at the same time, you start making mistakes.
Right.
And so in order not, because our human brain is not good enough, we need to basically stop. And 4 or 5 is too little, and you're basically giving a lot of time to yourself, but
Yeah.
probably around 8 is the right number.
Okay.
Every person is different. So I have around 8 people, the executives reporting to me, but they have 8
But
that
you
report
rolls
to
down
them,
from
and
there.
then there's a pyramid going on.
And just out of curiosity, of course, I've never managed development, but if you were managing, or if I was managing a team of 8 developers, do you assign them pieces of a product to write?
Yeah.
And then every day, do you go over what they've done, the code review kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when you're managing, they do the code. That's what we do, and but I like hands-on. I still like the like last week I was traveling and I went to Huntsville, Alabama, where part of the headquarters is. I got the people to get into the office, despite that people work from home now. And I sat with a team of 20 people that do development, and I start asking them, "What is that you do every day? It's like, what exactly is your problem?"
Yeah.
And it's still a sales exercise where you
Yeah.
go through, okay, we are a team, what works, what's broken, what's missing,
Yeah.
what's confusing,
Yeah.
and write it down and say, okay, we can only act on a couple of things practically,
Yeah.
and let's vote as a team into what we think is broken.
Yeah.
And they voted, and then I said, okay, too many things are voted. We're going to erase so that's not has votes, and we need to vote again. We need to get to 3. And the usual process to try to narrow and focus on something. And then after we got to 3, I says, well, we need to pick one, because that's the only thing I need to do. It's like the only thing I know how to do is do one thing.
One thing, yeah.
And let's do it right.
Yeah.
And we picked one, and we're going to do it, and we're going to repeat. Rinse and repeat.
Do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so interesting. I was just thinking, from Buenos Aires, Argentina, you got a job with IBM, which is a great move. And then you segued to Fluor Daniel. And you probably wouldn't have left IBM, I wouldn't have thought,
I wouldn't probably.
if you didn't have to move countries. But Fluor Daniel is a great company also. And then from there to DataStream, and you're essentially still there. Just changed names a few times, but
Well,
same.
if you want to hear the biggest selling story that I have,
Tell me. Yes, of course.
we sold DataStream to Infor for $200 million or so.
Yep.
When Infor sold to Coke with a K, Koch brothers, owners of Georgia
Yeah.
Pacific and Molex and so on, and Flint Hill Resources, oil and gas. Basically, we sold it for the equivalent of $800 million. That was the equivalent EAM portion. And then we sold, Infor decided to divest EAM and sell it to Hexagon. And so they told me, says, hey, we think that you are the guy to be in front of Hexagon to try to, and the other people that were trying to buy it. And I think you need to be participating in the sales process. And he says, what do you need? I said, I need Kevin Price. And so Kevin and I were the 2 people that basically sold EAM
Wow.
for $2,800 million.
Wow. That was Koch brothers or the next company?
Koch brothers, we sold it to Hexagon for
Okay.
2.8 billion.
Yeah,
So
so-
the biggest sale probably I did is selling a company for 2.8 billion.
Yeah, and that was based on recurring revenues of like 300 million. So it's almost 9 times that, which is really not out of range.
It's not a range, but it was a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. People ask me like, John,
If I do the discounted cash flow, by the way, and all this, when I was doing all this, and I think in your book you cover this, that is, you need to keep your habits healthy.
Yeah,
And I was in Fluor, and did material manager, was doing great. Then I started getting bored, and so because the project was already in cruise control, and it was more, the thinking time was over, and
Yeah.
it was more execution.
yeah,
So we started going every day after work. We used to go to the bar. And a bunch of Fluor guys, we go to the bar and we talk about the day, what we're going to do tomorrow.
yeah.
And then I started reflecting, I'm 4 nights a week in a bar for 3 hours. And I said, this has to stop. This has to stop. This
Yeah.
is not a good thing.
Yeah.
And I says, what can I do to find an excuse not to go to the bar? So I decided to do an MBA.
Ah,
And so I applied for Clemson. They accepted me. And I said, hey, guys, I have to go to school. I have classes. Sorry, can be in the bar,
Yeah.
maybe on Fridays. And I still went on Fridays, but that was it. And so in a year, I basically graduated from MBA in a year and in something like 14 months or something.
was your MBA just in the general MBA, or was it down a certain track?
It was the general MBA.
Okay.
And but I specialized in management.
Yeah.
That's what I do. And so that gave me the accounting thought
Yeah.
that was missing from my background.
Yeah, well, that's
and,
good.
And that gave me the idea that when we sold the EAM business to Hexagon, I positioning, I was looking at the discounted cash flows, and we're looking at the growth, and we're looking at the projections,
Yeah.
and to justify, a big play for both companies.
Yeah. Yeah, well, people ask me, they're like, don't you wish you'd have stayed because, because this number got so big? I'm like, well, I'm not sure it'd have been the same number if I was there. I mean, y'all did such a good job with it.
What I wish if I had more equity.
Yeah, yeah,
But every time you sell, you lose your equity, so it was impossible. But
yeah.
but
Well, that's a great story. So it's worth $3 billion at last stake, and now it's with Hexagon, right? Is that who you work for now?
Yeah.
Hexagon? And they're a monstrous...
big monster, multi-billion-dollar European company.
And they make like instruments for checking maintenance stuff?
They have different divisions, 2 big divisions. One is called Manufacturing Intelligence, that they do hardware for precision measurements.
Yeah.
Like for automotive, measure exact size of a fender, a car, or equipment, or a turbine. And the division I'm on is Asset Lifecycle Intelligence, that is software, that is what used to be Intergraph, that is CAD.
Okay.
It's 3D CAD and engineering tools like process and instrument diagramming, stress analysis. So I connected 2 worlds, the world of Fluor, that is all the engineering software, with the world of commercial software that I did with the instrument M4 is now converging, and I'm using both cloud and engineering thoughts at the same time. But it's very unique. It's not many people know.
And are they
know this.
Swedish?
They're Swedish.
Have you been over there?
In Sweden, it's very interesting. They have an office with 6 people. And they said, we're happy to have you here. I'm not sure what are you trying to see
Wow.
here. We have the secretary, we have the investor, and we have 2 more chairs. So they don't really have a presence, even though the capital owners
Interesting.
are originally from Sweden.
It'd be good to go talk to those guys. So that's some powerful stuff going on there.
It's interesting. I already did some conversations with them, and there is a company that is changing a lot. They also have software for doing reality capture, and reality capture is basically hardware that you scan things like a city, and you get a perfect model of the physics of the geometry of the city that competes with geographical information systems like ASRI or so on.
Right.
And so it's very interesting how this is changing. It's very much used. Imagine that you can scan how the topography of a place is, especially in areas of war conflict. This is actually has a life of its own.
Interesting. Well, I can't quit thinking about this because I've always known, I'm on the sales side and you came from the development side, but I've always known how effective you were. And until we had this discussion, I didn't know why. But for the people watching, I mean, anybody who is, about to get out of school or in school, whatever, they can aim to get these gaps filled. MBA to learn accounting and finances, and something to do with computer development, something to do with sales, and maybe even another language. But you build yourself out as if you're an avatar, right? And you're trying to make this avatar as powerful as possible. Now, Javi didn't get an MBA from Harvard, okay, but he's got an MBA, right? And so you fill these things out, and it makes you a very valuable commodity because IBM didn't want to give you up, Fluor didn't want to give you up, and the place you are now, you've been through several iterations of companies, and apparently they want to keep you. It's pretty cool.
It's incredible. You never stop learning. I read avidly, and you never stop. I comes naturally to me, and I know that we're all different. So some people do like this, some people don't. But there's YouTube videos. There's Khan Academy. There's Udemy. There's all kinds of things that you can do to learn if reading is not your thing. But it is in this modern world. There's no stop. Right. You have to continuously move.
Right. And when do you have a certain time of day when you like to do your learning or reading?
I like my perfect times is actually on weekends. And when I go on vacation, I take a bunch of books. They all believe I'm crazy. I can tell you one of the books I'm reading now, if you're interested in hearing. And I'm kind of a nerd, so you're probably going to figure that the books are very nerdy. And so the book that I'm reading now is Quantum Computers for Programmers. And there's one thing going on in the world that's called quantum computing. And I don't know too much about it. And I said, that's not acceptable that actually I'm a head of development and I don't know too much about quantum computing. So I said, okay, I'm going to read a book on quantum computing. And the first thing that came to my mind is quantum mechanics is not my forte from school. So now I had to buy a couple of books of quantum mechanics that has heavy mathematics. I had to buy a couple of algebra books. So I digested all that. Now I'm starting to understand. And what I'm starting to understand is that the idea that this is a faster computer is not exactly right. It is a faster computer sometimes. And the art is to try to understand from a business perspective, what is it better at and what is it worse at? And this technology is very early, so it's going to take 10 years. And unless we believe Mission Impossible that they have a quantum computer there. But I'm actually so fascinated that there is a customer of ours called CERN. CERN is the nuclear agency of Europe that has a large hadron collider. Big customer. In Geneva. And we always talk with the head of engineering. I know them for 20 years. And so I had to go to Switzerland for business, and I said, hey, I'll stop in Geneva and visit you. And he said, by the way, I'm reading this nerdy book on quantum computers. The guy told me, he says, oh, we have a quantum computer. Do you want to actually have a training course on quantum computing?
Wow.
And I was like, really? He says, yeah, we'll give you the 4-hour course. And so I'm going to Switzerland in September, and I'm going to sit down in CERN and get hands-on experience on quantum computing.
Pretty cool.
And
that's pretty cool.
Do I really need this for my job? No.
Right.
But yes.
Yeah.
Because you have to learn how the world is changing, because that's the only way that you can adapt.
Right. Otherwise, it'll just pass you by.
Otherwise, it's innovation's dilemma,
I know.
You change or they change you.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about ChatGPT.
Oh, lovely.
So, I figured, most of my guests don't really want to get into it, but I figured you would. So, is that the one you're using chat, or a different one?
We use we use various things for different things.
Okay.
When I was in Infor, I was the head of artificial intelligence for one of the teams, and we used it in the context of retail. And when you go to the drugstore, you're the Walgreens, and if you think that the items on the shelves are randomly placed there, you're seriously wrong.
Yeah.
There is thousands of dollars that get consumed in electricity every night to figure out exactly what they're going to put on the shelves and where. And we did the software that does artificial intelligence that does that. That's very specific in this is so science-based that one of my employees was the head professor of the University of Glasgow of computer science. He was my employee.
Yeah.
Because you need science that is basically very abstract.
Yeah.
That from the management side, you need to learn how to deal with these people that are so intellectually smart and so emotionally not smart. And so it's actually balanced. So we use tools, but the reality is in artificial intelligence, the majority of the software is open source. So it can be embedded. ChatGPT is generative AI, but the beauty is that the results are not numbers. The results is sentences. And the sentences are in perfect English. And so I'm going to give you two examples on this, two thoughts on this. Did you ever think that a software will understand your emotions as a user?
No.
Well, it does. And let me tell you how we do it. So the question is this: can you have software that understands the emotions of the user? What we do is we track the mouse in the screen. And we track if a person is frustrated, if a person is confused, or if a person is happy, or he has a job that is interrupted. And how we do that? It's not so hard if you think about it. Person that is frustrated, they move the mouse, they click. They're so angry at it that we check how many clicks they do, how much they move the mouse back and forth. And we record in this particular process, they're frustrated. Something is wrong with our designs. If the person actually does this, pauses, clicks help, comes back, pauses, clicks help, he's confused. He has no idea what he has to do. And so we're determining with artificial intelligence, checking all the clicks of all the people that are clicking, and we detect the emotion, and the software reacts to that emotion. And we start putting messages saying, hey, we think that you're probably confused about this. There's these videos that help you understand what we're trying to do. Do you want to post? And then ChatGPT comes on. That is, we listen to the questions, and we have ways of answering with ChatGPT that is scanning a big database of the knowledge behind the software, and we put it in English, responding back.
Okay.
So very interesting how we're doing this. That didn't exist. This did not exist 4 years ago.
No.
This happened all in the last 4 years. Yeah. And we use ChatGPT in a very different context from sales. That is, inside programs, you put code to check if the software has good quality, if it works the way it's supposed to be. Sometimes people don't write this code. Everybody's sloppy and forgets to do this. ChatGPT writes the code for us. And the military of the US, they do this as part of their processes. We are adopting those processes, and the thing works. It's not perfect, but it works. So we get all code, and we go through ChatGPT, and we add lines of code to do automatic testing. And we're adding it for conversational assistance with people on the field. So this is changing the game completely.
Yeah. Well, I've heard about it for so long, but when chat came out and I could actually type in like a Google search box what I wanted done, and it comes, it's like, there it is.
I tried some things that are silly. You go to ChatGPT, you create a user account, and I put failure modes over HVAC system, heat ventilation and air conditioning.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It was like, the only thing I had to do is just put this into asset management, and basically it's half of the problem solved.
Yeah.
And this is done through traversing or crawling tremendous amount of information in the web, and then having a engine that can answer back in English in proper sentences.
Yeah, amazing.
Amazing.
Yes, I always recommend to our viewers that they use ChatGPT at least a little bit every day. Try it for something, because it's almost like the computer just came out.
Yeah.
You need to get familiar with it.
Now, you see actually risks on all this. You always see there's two sides.
Yeah.
One is security.
Yeah.
Everything you put in ChatGPT is open source or is shared with everyone in the world.
Right.
So if you put things that are confidential, you have to be careful. And but of course, Microsoft has a version that is private. But that's exactly the same thing. The only thing you have to pay for it.
A little bit more.
Yeah, that is just expected. And so we're happy to pay and keep our confidential things back that way.
Well, a couple quick questions. We close up here. I know you like to read. What's your favorite book?
We talked a little bit about the quantum computer esoteric,
Yeah.
and of course, I read the Sales for Dupes. Thank you.
Yes,
And,
yes.
And a couple of things that I touched on today. I think there's a lot of wisdom. It's a very different book, by the way. It's a book that is most of the books on management behavior. They always have a format that is very similar. In the first chapter, they tell you what they want to say. Yeah. Then there's 5 chapters that basically cover what they just said. Yeah. And then they have a chapter that repeats the summary and says it one more time. And this is different. This book is different. And it's obvious that the stories of real experience, and half the stories I know firsthand because I lived them. Yeah. And so it's very, very good, very practical.
Thank you.
No accounting. This also is for people in sales, but for everybody. Nothing bothers me more than going to a meeting and having somebody starting talking about themselves forever. And it's like, oh my God. And it's like, we're here to listen. And we're not here to, and they just have this necessity to actually digress and talk. And
it's amazing to me how many people get away with that their whole career. And somehow, it's not going to kill you, but you're not ever going to do as well as you could if you learn how to listen.
Now, I was intrigued by this. So I read another book. There's one of the books that I read that is The 6 Working Genius. And I think let me go my cheat sheet here and see what is the author, and Lencioni. Okay. And the concept of the book is, they call it that there are 6 types of personalities that most humans have, and they call it the wonders, the inventors, the discerners, the galvanizers, the enablers, and the people who like checklists, that are the tenacity. And so. But what is important of that book, at least it resonated with me, is that most people are very good at 2 things, 2 of the 6 categories. They're okay with 2 more, so they can do 4 things. But they hate 2. Sometimes what I notice in management is we put a person that we like in a job, and the job changes and evolves. And we move them to a place, to something that they hate. And that's where things go really wrong. Because nobody likes doing something that you don't really like. Yeah. It consumes a lot of energy to do that. Yeah. And so intersecting what you just said is that understanding the people that, what are their personality styles and what is that they don't like, then you create teams that are better, that have all the styles of personalities to be more compact.
Yeah. That's called the 6 pillars?
The 6 Working Genius.
Genius, okay. Do you have a favorite?
Well, my particular genius is innovative, and I can do galvanizer, but I'm a discerner, but probably you are as well. Discerners are the guys who can judge. And, the discerners don't have a problem judging. And whenever I sit down, and I rarely share my judgment, but I have a judgment of what's going on. I have an opinion of what's going on. Well, and I learned to actually wait and get more information, so I refine my opinion. And but going back to your book, when people actually go to meetings and you go to visit a prospect or internal meetings in business to learn something about other groups, and then you start talking, it's just, what's the purpose of this? It's like, we didn't need a meeting for that.
Yeah, so easy. It's so easy. What about favorite band?
I have a condition that is ringing ears, so my hearing is kind of not good. Yeah. And so My favorite bands are like classical music because it's soothing.
Yeah.
I don't have to pay a lot of attention. It helps me think.
Yeah.
And so I usually going to work and get from work when I go to the beach and when I read, I like classical music, Enya kind of thing, Irish
Yeah.
music. And the bands that have a lot of words or whatever, I have to work too hard to try to understand all that,
Okay.
especially with all the noises. And it's not pleasant for me. So I'm kind of a
So
person
when
that's
you're
not
when
very
you're trying to
musical.
do deep work, do you want to listen to classical music or do you want to have nothing?
Both.
Sometimes.
Sometimes I need to sit down with nothing.
Yeah.
And I don't know how this works. The brain must work this way. The shower is the thing. It's like you're after one night and you have this big problem, and you're trying to find what is the possible options, and the shower is it. You're showering and you're like, oh,
There it
I
is.
get it.
Yeah.
These are the options.
Yeah.
And just in the mornings, and I keep a notepad and a pen at night.
Yeah.
I wake up in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
and it's super clear what you have to do. So you write it down because you forget. And
Well, this is a segue, but where I went to school, we had a president of our school at the Citadel would get up early in the morning and he would go to the pool and he would swim laps. And that was his thinking time. And he kept a notepad on both ends of the pool. He would stop and he'd swim back the other way. And Admiral Stockdale, I don't know if you remember him, Jim Stockdale, but
if I have to give management advice for people who actually have to interact with other people, is book time with yourself.
what does that
Making
mean?
your calendar an hour where you book that you're going to talk to yourself. Then you have an hour where you block the time
Yeah.
and you can actually hear yourself think. And you can spend an hour thinking of what you're doing. Otherwise, the endorphins are going meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and now the value you're bringing to things is not so high because you're not reflecting on what you're doing.
So you're recommending blocking some time every day, if possible, to just say, what's actually happening today? What am I trying to accomplish? What are my goals?
I used
All
to do
that
it in
stuff.
sales. When I was in sales, I used to do it in the early career. What is that I'm trying to do? What is
Yeah.
I'm trying to accomplish today?
Yeah.
How many calls? How many people I'm going to visit? What is that I want from this visit?
Yeah.
And I want to learn the project. I want to learn what they're doing. What is that I'm trying to do here? Otherwise, it becomes a going through the motions over and over again, and then you start wondering, what is I'm doing?
Yeah. Well, you're ahead of the game because I tell people it's the most important thing is to take the time to figure out what it is in fact they want. And once you know that, then anyone can help you figure out a plan to get there. It might take longer than you like, but I mean, there's a plan to get there. So that's good. That's good advice. Now do you have any other just general advice to the noobs? Any other things you would tell them?
Probably would say, I'm a South American guy.
Yeah.
Was born speaking Spanish, not a dime in my pocket. Moved to Canada, came to the U.S. When I landed in the U.S., my total wealth was $230. And so the only wealth I had was knowledge. I had an engineering degree. I had read a lot, and I was willing to learn whatever got thrown to my way. And so my thought is, if I can do it, anyone can do it. This is basically the answer. It's like, it's the only reason why you cannot do this is yourself.
Right.
If you're determined to do it, and resonating from your book that is postpone gratification. When you start having some financial success, we all get tempted to say, hey, let's buy this or buy that I need. No, you don't need, you want. That is different.
Yeah.
And I'm very frugal in that sense. That is, I postpone gratification. I just buy what I need to exist. And if you spend less than you earn, you will be rich.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what number it is.
Yeah, right. That's a good point. Well, it's a great story, Javi. I think it's a great sales story, and it really surprised me that you had that sneaky sales training early in your career I didn't know about. But I've always known how good you were at what you did, and not surprised at all that you're managing 1,600 people now around the globe. So Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Pleasure. And nice to have joined serving times with you and for you. And I always have a great admiration of your story as well. And we all have our own story, so we had to find our path. And but a pleasure to be here today.
All right. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.